My name is Nia, and I am 32 years old. After my husband and I moved into our new custom-mule estate, the former owner called me late at night. Her voice was urgent. She told me she forgot to disconnect a hidden security camera in the den and saw my husband and his mother doing something unforgivable. She warned me not to tell him and told me to come over alone. My phone almost slipped out of my hand. I simply took a deep breath and turned my car around. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to outsmart a toxic family who thought they could use you. I was driving home in my luxury SUV after a grueling 4-hour shift at my crisis management public relations firm. As a black woman in a cutthroat industry, I had to work twice as hard to build my agency from the ground up. I made my living cleaning up catastrophic messes, corporate embezzlement, political scandals, celebrity affairs. I was the person high-profile clients called when their lives were falling apart. I was cold, calculated, and ruthlessly efficient at my job. I was the sole breadwinner of my household. My husband, Jamal, was an investment banker who loved to project an image of black excellence to his friends and our massive church community. He wore custom-tailored suits, sported expensive imported watches, and drove a luxury sports car that I paid for in cash. He loved the aesthetics of ultimate success, but I was the one financing his entire reality. The financial imbalance in our marriage was a heavy burden that I carried silently to protect his fragile ego. It was a Tuesday evening, and heavy rain was lashing against my windshield. I was absolutely exhausted, craving nothing more than a hot shower and a glass of expensive wine in the new home I had just closed on a month prior. It was a stunning $1.5 million property in a highly exclusive gated community. I had paid the massive down payment using my own hard-earned stock options. Then my phone rang over the car audio system. The caller ID showed Mrs. Washington. She was the sharp, wealthy, retired real estate mogul who had sold me the house. We had bonded deeply during the long closing process. She respected my relentless hustle, and I deeply admired her legacy. I answered the call, expecting a simple question about forwarded mail or missing paperwork. Instead, her voice cut through the quiet hum of my car like a piercing alarm. "Nia, I need you to listen to me carefully. Do not go home. I forgot to disconnect the hidden security feed in the den before I moved out. I was logging into the system tonight to clear my account, and I saw your husband and his mother in the house. You need to come to my house right now. Do not tell him you are coming." My hands gripped the leather steering wheel tightly. My heart pounded furiously against my ribs, but my professional instincts immediately kicked in. I did not ask panicked questions. I did not cry. I simply hit the brakes, made a sharp turn at the next intersection, and headed straight toward her gated community. The drive took 20 minutes, but it felt like hours. My mind raced through a dozen different scenarios. Jamal and his mother, Loretta, had a bizarrely close and deeply toxic relationship. Loretta was a woman completely obsessed with her status at our local mega-church. She viewed me not as a beloved daughter-in-law, but as a walking ATM machine. She constantly weaponized the concept of the black tax. She insisted that because I was a successful professional, I had a cultural and religious obligation to fund the extravagant lifestyle of her entire family. She believed my money belonged to her son and by extension to her. I pulled up to Mrs. Washington's sprawling estate. The heavy iron gates swung open immediately. She was waiting for me at the grand front door. She did not offer me a hug or superficial words of comfort. She knew exactly who I was. She knew I was a businesswoman who dealt with massive crises every single day. She ushered me into her grand foyer and led me straight to her kitchen. She slid a sleek silver tablet across the cold marble counter. "Look at this," she said quietly. I looked down at the glowing screen. It was a crystal-clear live feed of my own den, the room I had painstakingly decorated just weeks ago. Sitting on my custom velvet sofa were Jamal and Loretta. They were drinking a bottle of vintage wine I had specifically purchased to celebrate securing a massive corporate client. I watched the screen, my breath catching in my throat as Loretta threw her head back and laughed. Her voice echoed through the tablet speakers loud and clear. "That foolish girl thinks because her name is on the deed she actually owns this place," Loretta sneered, taking a large sip of my wine. "Once you process that equity line tomorrow, we will finally have the cash we need. We will fund Kiara's lifestyle brand, and you can finally move Maya into that downtown condo. Naya is just the workhorse. She is a machine built to serve our family." Jamal chuckled darkly, leaning back on the sofa and loosening his expensive silk tie. I am the man of the house, Ma. What is hers is mine. She is too busy working to even notice what I do with the accounts. I already forged her signature on the preliminary banking documents. The loan officer is my fraternity brother, so he pushed it through without asking to see her in person. We are getting $300,000 pulled straight out of the home equity. The profound betrayal hit me with the force of a physical blow. Every single word they spoke unlocked a sickening realization. Kiara was my 8-year-old sister-in-law. She was an entitled wannabe social media influencer who completely refused to get a real job. She lived entirely off the money Jamal secretly funneled to her from our joint accounts. And Maya, the name made my blood run completely cold. Maya was the lead soloist in Loretta's church choir. She was 26 years old and always overly friendly with Jamal at Sunday service. Loretta had brought her into my home on multiple occasions under the guise of church committee business. Now I was listening to my own husband and his highly religious mother casually plot to use the equity in my home to buy his mistress a luxury condominium. They were scheming to extract cash from the property I had worked tirelessly to purchase. Jamal had lost his own life savings in a terrible cryptocurrency investment the previous year. I had covered his tracks to save his pride. I had protected his ego from his judgmental friends. And this was my ultimate repayment. They viewed my ambition, my daily sacrifices, and my financial success as nothing more than a resource to be violently plundered and distributed to the people who hated me most. Most women might have broken down in hysterical tears. Some might have screamed wildly or thrown the tablet across the room in a fit of passionate rage, but I did not shed a single tear. I am a crisis management executive. When a major scandal breaks, I do not panic. I strategize. I analyze the battlefield. I neutralize the threat. I dismantle the problem piece by piece until nothing is left of the opposition. My husband and his mother had just become the biggest liability of my life, and I was going to handle them, exactly like a hostile corporate takeover. I calmly asked Mrs. Washington for the login credentials to the security system. She handed them over with a look of deep, silent respect. I quickly downloaded the high-definition footage directly to my secure encrypted cloud server. I made 3 separate digital backups on different global servers to ensure the evidence could never be erased or altered by anyone. I was gathering my ammunition for the war they did not even know they had started. As the progress bar on the screen reached 100%, my phone lit up brightly. The harsh glow illuminated the dark marble counter. It was a text message from Jamal. The notification popped up over a picture of us smiling happily on our wedding day. The message read, "Come home soon, beautiful. My mom cooked your favorite Sunday dinner tonight. We have a huge surprise for you." I stared at the words on the screen, feeling a cold, dark smile spread slowly across my face. They honestly thought they were playing a game with a naive, exhausted, overworked wife. They had absolutely no idea. They had just declared war on a woman who made a very lucrative living out of destroying people who made mistakes. I thanked Mrs. Washington for her loyalty, grabbed my car keys, and walked out into the pouring rain. It was time to go home, sit at their table, and see exactly what kind of surprise my loving family had waiting for me tonight. I parked my luxury sport utility vehicle in the freshly paved driveway of my new estate and took a long, deep breath before opening the heavy oak front door. The rich, savory smell of candied yams, roasted chicken, and spicy collarded greens hit me immediately upon entering the grand foyer. I walked slowly and quietly into the formal dining room of the massive home I had just purchased. Sitting casually around my custom mahogany dining table today were the very people actively plotting my absolute financial ruin. My husband, Jamal, sat right at the head of the long wooden table. To his immediate right was his mother, Loretta, holding court, as she always did whenever she visited our home. Next to her sat my deeply entitled sister-in-law, Kiara, scrolling aimlessly on her bright smartphone screen instead of eating the food her mother had prepared. On the left side of the spacious room sat the older brother of Jamal, Andre, and his wife, Tara. They were laughing loudly together, passing large ceramic bowls of hot food back and forth, as if I were merely a passing guest in my own luxury house. I placed my house keys quietly down. I walked deliberately toward the empty chair located at the foot of the table. No one stopped their lively conversation to greet me or ask about my grueling 4-hour day at the public relations firm. Jamal simply glanced up from his plate of food and vaguely gestured toward the remaining serving dishes in the center of the table. I remained perfectly calm as I pulled out my chair and sat down. Loretta did not even wait for me to unfold my linen napkin and place it properly on my lap. She pointed her silver fork directly at my face. She pointed the utensil right across the expensive floral centerpiece I had arranged just yesterday. Nia, I need you to pack up that entire home office of yours tomorrow morning before you go to work. Kiara absolutely needs a proper professional studio for her new makeup vlog. Jamal and I already looked at the space earlier today, and we agreed the natural lighting in that specific room is absolutely perfect for her expensive ring lights and camera equipment. I froze with the heavy silver serving spoon suspended in my hand halfway to my porcelain plate. I looked at Kiara. She did not even bother to look up from her glowing screen to acknowledge the massive demand her mother had just made on her behalf. She just flipped her long, expensive hair extensions over her left shoulder and muttered a quick, dismissive word of thanks to her mother without making any eye contact with me whatsoever. I placed a small piece of roasted chicken on my plate with slow and deliberate precision. I tapped into the intense crisis management training that made me a top executive in my highly competitive field. I kept my voice perfectly level and very calm. I completely stripped all negative emotion from my tone before I finally spoke to my demanding mother-in-law. I used that specific office space to manage severe crisis communications for multinational Fortune 500 companies. Loretta, that highly demanding job is exactly what pays the massive monthly mortgage on this beautiful property we are currently sitting inside. Loretta slammed her hand flat against the solid wooden table with sudden aggressive force. The crystal water glasses rattled loudly from the sudden physical impact of her anger. You can just work from the kitchen island like a normal person does today. Your sister-in-law is trying very hard to build a prominent lifestyle brand from scratch. She desperately needs a dedicated creative space to secure lucrative sponsorships and brand deals online. You are always so incredibly selfish with your blessings, and you never want to see anyone else in this family succeed. I picked up my fork and locked my eyes directly onto the furious gaze of Loretta, refusing to back down from her manipulative tactics. Kiara wants a professional studio in the exact house I paid a 20% down payment on using my own hard-earned stock options. I asked the question smoothly and calmly, letting the reality of my financial contribution hang in the tense air. Is this current situation just like last year when she demanded that brand new luxury Mercedes vehicle? The exact same Mercedes I had to pay off completely with my own savings snorts because Jamal foolishly co-signed a predatory auto loan he absolutely could not afford on his current bank salary. Kiara finally looked up from her smartphone and glared violently at me across the crowded dining room. You make way too much money to be this stingy with your family today, she snapped bitterly, her voice rising in pitch. Jamal told us your corporate bonus this year was massive enough to pay for anything. You have more than enough wealth to share with the people who love you and support you. Andre scoffed loudly from the other side of the table. He leaned back aggressively in his dining chair and crossed his muscular arms over his chest, staring at me with pure disdain. That is the fundamental problem with you independent women today, he said, his deep voice dripping with pure condescension and spite. You get a little bit of success, you get a fancy title, and you completely forget everything about the black tax. When one of us finally makes it out of the struggle, we all are supposed to rise together as a unified unit. You are supposed to uplift the extended family and share the wealth, not hoard your corporate money like a greedy miser who only cares about herself. Tara chimed in immediately after her husband, nodding her head eagerly to support his ridiculous argument against my financial boundaries. Exactly right, Andre. Jamal is out here desperately trying to build real generational wealth for the family name. He cares about the family name, and you are sitting here complaining about giving up one tiny room in a massive house. A good, supportive wife happily submits to the grand vision her husband has for the family legacy without questioning his authority. You should be extremely happy to help Kiara get her new business off the ground instead of constantly complaining about money. I turned my sharp gaze directly to Jamal, waiting to see how he would respond to this coordinated ambush. He had been sitting quietly the entire time, cowardly letting his mother and siblings attack my character. He allowed them to target my finances without saying a single word in my defense. Now he slowly stood up from his chair, puffing out his chest and adjusting his tailored shirt collar, attempting to project ultimate dominance in front of his audience. Actually, Nia, my mom, and I already took care of the entire funding issue for the new brand. I used my legal spousal authorization to pull a $300,000 home equity line of credit on this house yesterday afternoon while you were busy at work. The funds are already safely sitting in the new account. They are sitting in her new business checking account right now, ready to be used. I am the man and the head of this family, and I made an executive decision to invest in our collective future, whether you like the decision or not. Right on cue, my smartphone buzzed violently inside my tailored blazer pocket. I pulled the device out and looked down at the bright screen displaying a new message. It was an automated urgent fraud alert from my primary mortgage lender confirming the worst possible scenario. A massive withdrawal of exactly $300,000 had cleared. It had been successfully processed and cleared through the banking system. The substantial home equity I had worked countless grueling years to build from nothing was entirely gone. I stared at the digital numbers on my screen, feeling a sudden chilling calmness wash over my entire body. I did not scream or throw my plate across the room. I simply looked up at my husband, who was smiling smugly at me from the head of the table. He truly believed he had outsmarted me and secured his financial dominance over my life. He believed I was completely trapped right now. He thought the sudden debt would force me to comply with his demands and accept my role as the silent provider for his parasitic family. Loretta took a long sip of her wine, smiling in triumph as she watched me process the devastating financial blow. Kiara went back to scrolling on her phone, completely unbothered by the theft that had just occurred for her benefit. Andre and Tara began eating their food again, chatting happily about their upcoming vacation plans. They all thought the war was over and they had won. They were completely and utterly tragically entirely wrong today. As the heavy mahogany front door finally clicked shut behind Andre and Tara, the oppressive energy in the house shifted dramatically. Loretta had already floated out to Jamal's sports car, practically dragging Kiara and her brightly lit smartphone along with her into the rainy evening. The heavy silence that fell over the grand foyer was thick and suffocating, replacing the chaotic noise of their entitled demands. Jamal locked the deadbolt with a loud metallic snap and turned to face me. He wore a triumphant, arrogant smirk across his face. It was the exact kind of smile a man wears when he truly believes he has successfully cornered his opponent and secured a permanent victory. He loosened his expensive silk tie and began walking up the sweeping curved staircase toward our master suite, projecting the swagger of a conquering king who had just put his unruly subject back in her proper place. I followed him up the stairs. My footsteps were completely silent against the plush runner carpet. I did not rush. I did not storm up the steps in a blind emotional rage. I walked with the deliberate, highly measured pace of an apex predator, tracking its wounded prey. In my profession, the absolute worst thing a person can do during a rapidly escalating crisis is react with visible emotion. Emotion makes you sloppy. Emotion makes you predictable. I shoved my personal feelings about my failing marriage into a dark, locked mental vault. Right now, I was operating strictly as a corporate crisis manager, and Jamal was the hostile entity attempting to bankrupt my company. By the time I entered the spacious master bedroom, Jamal was already unbuttoning his custom-tailored dress shirt, tossing it carelessly across the designer-upholstered armchair in the corner of the room. He did not even bother to look at me. He was acting as though stealing $300,000 from our home equity was a perfectly normal Tuesday night activity. He hummed a quiet tune, entirely pleased with his own performance downstairs. I stood in the bedroom doorway and watched him for a long, quiet moment. I needed to understand exactly how he had pulled off this massive financial sabotage without triggering the standard fraud alerts. The banking security protocols for a home equity line of credit required strict dual authorization. When we purchased this estate, I had purposefully set up the mortgage accounts to mandate both of our physical signatures and government identification for any major financial withdrawals. I crossed the hardwood floor and stood directly behind him as he looked at himself admiringly in the large vanity mirror. "How did you bypass the bank security protocols without my physical signature, Jamal?" I asked. My voice was a soft, deadly whisper. It carried absolutely no anger, no sadness, and no fear, which I knew unsettled him far more than a screaming match ever could. I did not receive a single phone call from the loan officer to verify the transaction. I did not sign a single legal document in front of a licensed notary. So tell me exactly how my equity disappeared into your sister's fraudulent shell company. Jamal stopped unbuttoning his cuffs. He looked at my reflection in the mirror, and the smugness on his face rapidly morphed into a mask of fake, deeply patronizing concern. It was a terrifyingly quick transition. He turned around and placed his large hands firmly on my shoulders, attempting to pull me into a comforting, husbandly embrace. I stepped back instantly, breaking his unwanted physical contact. He sighed heavily, playing the role of the patient, long-suffering partner. "Nia, you really need to calm down right now," he said, his voice dripping with forced sympathy and condescension. You are working yourself into a complete nervous breakdown, and it is honestly starting to scare me. You signed those authorization papers last month when you were completely exhausted from that massive public relations crisis in New York. You were barely sleeping for 2 solid weeks. You were running entirely on black coffee and adrenaline. You do not even remember signing the bank forms, do you? I stared at him, letting his bold, ridiculous lie hang in the quiet air of our bedroom. He was actually trying to convince me that I had experienced a stress-induced blackout and signed away a fortune without realizing it. It was textbook psychological manipulation. He was attempting to weaponize my demanding career to make me doubt my own sanity. You are losing your grip on reality, Nia, he continued smoothly, stepping closer to crowd my personal space. You are working so hard for these corporate clients that you are completely neglecting your own mental health, your memory, and your own home. You need to let me handle the family finances exclusively from now on. You are just too fragile and overworked right now. As a black man in this society, I have a fundamental duty to lead my family. I need to be seen leading my household, making the hard executive decisions, and providing for our future legacy. I cannot do that if I am constantly living in my wife's shadow. You make me feel completely emasculated when you hoard all the financial control and treat me like an employee. I am doing this for us. I am doing this to save you from working yourself into an early grave. He looked at me with wide, earnest eyes, practically daring me to question his fabricated reality. He truly expected me to doubt my own flawless memory. He wanted me to collapse into his arms, apologize for my stressful career, and thank him profusely for taking the heavy financial burden off my delicate shoulders. I felt a laugh rising deep in my throat, cold and sharp as broken glass. I did not let it escape. Instead, I leveled my gaze directly into his eyes, stripping away every single ounce of warmth or affection I had ever felt for this man. Leading? I asked, my voice slicing through his pathetic defense like a surgical scalpel. Is this what you call leading your family as a strong man? Because it looks remarkably similar to how you led this family 2 years ago. Do you remember that specific display of masculine leadership, Jamal? Like how you secretly emptied our joint emergency savings account to pay off your mother's exorbitant country club dues because she desperately wanted to impress the pastor's wife and pretend she came from old money. Jamal flinched violently. The fake patronizing concern vanished from his face, instantly replaced by a flash of genuine, unadulterated panic. He had wrongly assumed I would never bring up that horrific betrayal again. We had spent months in highly expensive marriage counseling over that exact incident, and he had sworn on his own life he would never touch our joint assets without my explicit consent ever again. You cried in our therapist's office and promised me that was a one-time lapse in judgment caused by the pressure of the black tax. I continued stepping toward him and forcing him to take a defensive step backward. But here you are today, committing federal wire fraud and forging my legal signature to fund Kiara's non-existent makeup business and pay off whatever debts Loretta is hiding. Do not ever insult my professional intelligence by claiming I forgot signing away my own hard-earned equity. You forged my signature, Jamal. You used your college fraternity brother at the bank to push through a fraudulent loan, bypassing all security measures. And you stole from me to stroke your own incredibly fragile ego. You are not a leader. You are a common thief playing dress-up in a custom suit I bought for you. His face flushed a deep, furious crimson. The prominent veins in his neck bulged against his dark skin. For a terrifying second, his hands clenched into tight fists, and I thought he might actually try to strike me to regain his lost dominance. But Jamal was a coward at his absolute core. He could not handle a direct, factual confrontation when his psychological manipulation completely failed to work on his target. He aggressively grabbed his expensive leather gym bag from the closet floor and shoved his workout clothes inside with jerky, angry movements. You are completely impossible to talk to when you get this hysterical and disrespectful, he spat bitterly, slinging the heavy bag over his broad shoulder. You have zero respect for me, zero respect for my mother, and zero respect for traditional family values. I am going to the gym to burn off this negative energy and clear my head. Maybe when I get back, you will be ready to act like a loving, supportive wife instead of a ruthless corporate dictator. He stormed out of his master bedroom, slamming the heavy wooden door behind him with enough force to rattle the expensive picture frames hanging on the hallway walls. I stood perfectly still and listened to his heavy footsteps stomping down the staircase. I heard the front door open, the electronic chime ring out, and the door slam shut loudly behind him. I did not move a single muscle until I was absolutely certain the house was completely silent. The moment I knew I was alone, my professional protocol initiated. I walked calmly to my bedside table and picked up my encrypted work tablet. As a seasoned crisis manager, I knew a fundamental truth about human behavior. Guilty people always make their biggest, most careless mistakes immediately after a major confrontation. They feel a surge of adrenaline. They feel a false sense of invincibility because they escaped the argument, and they immediately get sloppy. I logged directly into the hidden security feed that Mrs. Washington had generously left active on her private, untraceable server. I pulled up the high-define exterior cameras, fully expecting to see Jamal's luxury sports car backing aggressively out of the driveway, heading rapidly toward his upscale 2-4-hour fitness center downtown. But the driveway camera showed his sports car still parked perfectly in its spot. Jamal was not walking toward the garage. He had not left the property at all. My brow furrowed in intense concentration. I quickly switched the live camera view to the rear exterior of the house, focusing the lens on the dark, secluded patio area near the secondary kitchen entrance. The advanced night vision camera illuminated the rainy scene perfectly, in stark, glowing black and white. Jamal was standing outside in the pouring rain, partially shielded by the large patio umbrella. He was holding the heavy back door wide open, peering anxiously out into the darkness of the landscaped backyard. A slender figure suddenly stepped out from the shadows of the large, sprawling oak trees at the edge of the property line. It was a woman wearing a heavy, oversized trench coat with a large hood pulled up closely around her head to shield her face from the harsh weather. As she stepped quickly into the welcoming light of the open doorway, she reached up and pulled the wet hood down, shaking out her long, distinctively styled natural hair. It was Maya, the sweet, supposedly innocent lead choir director from Loretta's prestigious church committee. I sat down slowly on the edge of my bed and watched the bright screen in absolute chilling silence. I watched as Jamal reached out and tenderly pulled his pregnant mistress into the warmth of my beautiful new custom kitchen. He kissed her forehead gently, helping her take off her wet coat completely and utterly unaware that I was watching his every single move, capturing every single frame of his ultimate betrayal from the dark bedroom located right above their heads. I did not confront them that night. A seasoned crisis manager never strikes when the opponent is high on adrenaline and expecting a fight. You strike when they feel absolutely safe. I sat in the dark for another hour, watching the silent feet of my husband and his pregnant mistress laughing in my kitchen before they finally disappeared into the guest wing. I did not shed a single tear. I simply locked the bedroom door, opened my laptop, and went to work. I spent the entire night tracing the digital footprints of the fraudulent home equity loan. By the time the sun came up, I had uncovered a mountain of devastating financial secrets. Jamal was not just funding a makeup studio or a condo. He was frantically trying to cover up a massive, sprawling mess of federal debt that his mother had accumulated over years of living far beyond her means. The next afternoon, the weather was perfectly clear and sunny, completely washing away the gloomy rain from the night before. The timing for my counterstrike was absolutely impeccable. Loretta had invited the highest tier of her church social circle over to my house for a private luncheon. The Women of Faith Committee was a group of deeply judgmental, highly influential, wealthy older women who essentially ran the social hierarchy of our massive local congregation. They were the ultimate gatekeepers of reputation and status within the community. I stood quietly in my pristine kitchen, looking out through the expansive glass patio doors. My custom travertine backyard was completely transformed. Loretta had brought out my expensive crystal glassware and my premium catered appetizers. She was wearing a bright yellow designer dress that I had paid for last Christmas. She was practically vibrating with arrogance as she held court among the church elders. She was waving her hands grandly, showing off the landscaped pool area and the custom outdoor kitchen. "My son bought this beautiful home for his family," Loretta announced loudly, making sure her voice carried across the patio for everyone to hear. "He works so hard at the investment bank. He just wants his mother to be comfortable and blessed in her golden years. He spoils us all so much. The Lord has truly favored my Jamal." The church women nodded approvingly, murmuring their praises and sipping their drinks. They looked around with naked envy, completely buying into the fraudulent narrative that my husband was a massive financial success, and I was merely his lucky, quiet wife. I picked up a heavy silver tray from the kitchen counter. On the tray, I placed a tall crystal picture of freshly brewed iced tea, a set of matching glasses, and a stack of mundane incoming mail. Tucked right in the middle of that stack of mail was a thick, bright red folder. It contained the highly confidential documents my forensic accountant had just flagged for me during my sleepless night of research. I took a deep breath, adjusted my posture to project an image of perfect, relaxed domesticity, and pushed open the glass doors. I walked outside with a polite, welcoming smile plastered firmly on my face. I approached the large glass patio table where the women were gathered in a tight, gossiping circle. "Good afternoon, ladies," I said sweetly, my voice completely smooth and untroubled. "It is so wonderful to have you all here in our home today. I brought some fresh iced tea to cool you down." The women turned to me with tight, superficial smiles. Loretta shot me a brief, sharp look of warning, silently commanding me not to ruin her grand performance. I ignored her entirely as I leaned over the center of the table to set the heavy picture down. I deliberately shifted my weight and let my heel catch sharply on the edge of the stone patio tiles. I gasped loudly, feigning a sudden and violent loss of balance. The heavy silver tray tilted sharply downward. The pitcher slid forward, but I caught it just in time. However, the stack of mail in the bright red folder slid completely off the tray and slapped loudly onto the center of the glass table. The impact caused the folder to pop wide open. Crisp official federal documents spilled directly into the center of the table, landing right next to the plate of expensive hors d'oeuvres. The bold, terrifying logo of the Internal Revenue Service was instantly visible to every single woman sitting there. The heavy black ink detailed massive penalties, accrued interest, and severe legal threats. "Oh, my absolute apologies," I cried out, placing a hand over my chest in mock horror as I hastily began gathering the scattered papers. I made sure to move just slowly enough so that the women seated around the table had ample time to read the bold headers on the federal notices. I was just organizing the incoming mail and trying to sort through some of Jamal's complex financial files. I paused, holding a brightly colored notice of intent to levy in my hand. I looked directly at my mother-in-law. I let my voice pitch perfectly, ensuring it carried with crystal clarity across the entire patio, so that not a single syllable would be missed by the eager ears of the church gossips. "Loretta," I said, my tone dripping with innocent, devastating concern, "it looks like the IRS is threatening to officially garnish your wages for 5 years of severe tax evasion. Is that the real reason why Jamal had to steal $300,000 from my personal home equity yesterday?" The absolute silence that fell over the patio was deafening. It was as if the air had been violently sucked out of the space. Then came the gasps. Sister Patterson dropped her linen napkin onto the deck. Sister Miller choked slightly on her iced tea, her eyes wide with unadulterated shock. The women instantly leaned away from Loretta as if she had suddenly caught a highly contagious disease. Within seconds, the furious, quiet whispering began. The pristine, holy reputation Loretta had spent decades carefully cultivating within the church community was instantly fractured into a million unreoverable pieces. Loretta sat completely frozen in her chair. The smug, arrogant glow vanished from her face, replaced by a sickly pale shade of absolute terror. She looked at the federal documents in my hand, then looked at the judging, horrified faces of her elite church committee. She realized in that exact moment that her ultimate social execution had just occurred in her own son's backyard. A cornered narcissist confronted with public shame will never apologize. They will always try to inflict a deeper, more personal wound to aggressively deflect the attention away from their own colossal failures. Loretta's shock rapidly morphed into a blinding, vicious rage. Her face turned a deep, furious crimson. She stood up so violently that her heavy wrought iron chair scraped loudly against the stone patio. Her eyes were blazing with a hatred so pure and toxic it was almost tangible. She pointed a shaking finger directly at my face, choosing the most painful, sensitive weapon she thought she had in her arsenal. "Do not listen to a single word this crazy woman says," Loretta screamed, abandoning all pretense of her wholly dignified church persona. Her voice was shrill and desperate, echoing off the exterior walls of the estate. "Nia is just acting completely stressed and hysterical because she is barren." The church women gasped again, their hands flying to their mouths at the shocking cruelty of the sudden accusation. Loretta did not stop. She leaned forward, slamming her hands flat onto the glass table. "That is exactly right," Loretta announced to the entire committee, her voice echoing with venom. "She is a broken woman who cannot even give my son a child. That is the real reason why Jamal and I are legally setting up a family trust to manage all of her PR firm's profits. She absolutely needs to provide for this family financially, since she cannot provide an heir. Loretta's vicious words hung in the warm afternoon air. The church committee members gasped, their eyes darting between my mother-in-law and me, waiting for the explosive, hysterical reaction Loretta so desperately wanted. She wanted me to scream. She wanted me to cry and defend my womanhood right there on the travertine patio. She needed me to look like the unstable, bitter wife, so her fabricated narrative would survive the shocking IRS revelation. I did not give her a single drop of that satisfaction. I looked at the group of horrified women, offered a perfectly polite, practiced corporate smile, and smoothed the front of my tailored blazer. "Enjoy the iced tea, ladies," I said, my voice completely devoid of any negative emotion. "I have a pressing business appointment to attend today." I turned on my heel and walked back into the house. I did not slam the glass patio door. I closed it with a soft, definitive click. I grabbed my keys from the kitchen island, walked out to my car, and drove straight out of the neighborhood. I left Loretta standing in the absolute wreckage of her own public humiliation. I drove directly to the sprawling gated estate of Mrs. Washington. She was my mentor, my former boss, and the absolute most ruthless corporate strategist I had ever known in my entire career. When I arrived, her private security waved me through the massive iron gates. Mrs. Washington was waiting for me in her grand foyer, holding a crystal glass of sparkling water. She did not offer me a comforting hug or a sympathetic smile. She knew I did not need pity today. I needed live ammunition. "Right this way, Nia," she said, turning and leading me down a long hallway toward her private home office. "I have someone you need to meet right now. The time for gathering simple security footage is over. We are officially moving to the financial extraction phase." We entered a vast, dimly lit office, lined with floor-to-ceiling mahogany bookshelves. Sitting at the massive antique desk was a man in a razor-sharp charcoal suit. He had the cold, calculating eyes of an apex predator. "Nia, this is Arthur Vance," Mrs. Washington said, taking a seat in a leather armchair. "Arthur is the most lethal forensic accountant on the Eastern Seaboard. He specializes exclusively in high, net worth, high-conflict divorces. He finds the secret money that cowardly husbands try to bury." Arthur did not offer a polite greeting. He simply opened a thick black leather folder and pushed it across the polished desk toward me. I sat down and opened the cover. "Your husband is incredibly arrogant, but he is painfully sloppy." Arthur began, his voice flat and analytical. "He thinks he covered his tracks by using his sister as the primary shield for the home equity line of credit. He funneled exactly $300,000 into a business checking account registered under Kiara's name yesterday afternoon. He designated the transfer as seed funding for a digital media production company." Arthur leaned forward, tapping a manicured finger against a printed bank statement. "I dug directly into that specific business account. Kiara does not own a production company. The LLC was registered in Delaware just 48 hours ago. It is a textbook shell company. There are no invoices for expensive ring lights. There are no receipts for high-end camera equipment. There is no lease agreement for a professional studio space. Kiara was merely the temporary holding vessel for the stolen funds." I stared at the black and white numbers on the page, my crisis management brain rapidly processing the raw data. If the money did not go to Kiara, where exactly did Jamal send my equity? I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level. Arthur slid a second document out of the folder. He transferred the money out of Kiara's shell account in two very specific, highly calculated wire transfers this morning. The first wire was for exactly $50,000. It was sent directly to the Department of the Treasury. Jamal paid off a massive portion of his mother's outstanding tax debt to temporarily halt the immediate wage garnishment you discovered today. Loretta knew exactly where that money came from. She actively helped him orchestrate the theft to save her own skin. I felt a cold, hard knot form in the pit of my stomach. Loretta had stood on my patio, drinking my iced tea, calling me barren and useless, all while secretly knowing she had just used $50,000 of my hard-earned wealth to pay off her own federal crimes. The sheer magnitude of her holy hypocrisy was breathtaking, and the remaining $250,000 I asked, my eyes locked securely onto Arthur. Arthur slid a third piece of paper across the desk. It was a receipt for a massive wire transfer to an elite, highly exclusive real estate escrow account. He did not buy a professional makeup studio. He used the remaining $250,000 to secure a massive cash down payment on a luxury two-bedroom condo located right in the heart of the downtown arts district. I looked at the address printed on the official escrow receipt. It was one of the most expensive high-rise buildings in the entire city. Jamal could never afford the monthly maintenance fees on his current bank salary, let alone the mortgage. Who is listed on the property deed? I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. I already knew the answer before Arthur even opened his mouth. I had seen the security footage from the kitchen last night. I had seen Jamal pulling the choir director out of the pouring rain. The deed is solely in the name of a woman named Maya Evans. Arthur confirmed, sliding a printed photograph of the condo building across the desk. Your husband bought his mistress a luxury penthouse using your home equity. He intentionally put the property entirely in her name to hide the asset from any future divorce proceedings. He truly thought he could steal your wealth and build a completely separate life right under your nose. Mrs. Washington scoffed from her armchair, taking a slow sip of her water. Men who steal from their wives always think they are the smartest person in the room. They never anticipate the wife auditing the theft before the ink is even dry. I stared at the escrow documents, feeling a terrifyingly calm clarity wash over my entire mind. Jamal had drained the safety net I built. He had funded his mother's criminal tax evasion. He had purchased a luxury home for another woman. He had done all of this while simultaneously plotting with his mother to legally seize control of my public relations firm through a fraudulent family trust. They believed I was just a walking ATM, a silent provider who would absorb their daily abuse and fund their extravagant lifestyles without ever fighting back. We have enough solid evidence right here to absolutely destroy him in civil court, I said, looking up at Arthur. I want every single dime returned. I want the condo seized. I want Loretta reported to the IRS for continuing to hide assets. We will do all of that and much more. Arthur set his lips curling into a sharp, predatory smile. But there is one more vital piece of information you need to factor into your ultimate crisis strategy today. Arthur reached into the very back of the black folder. He pulled out a final single sheet of paper and slid it slowly across the polished mahogany wood. It was a medical billing statement. I traced the money back even further, Arthur explained softly. I found a hidden checking account Jamal opened 3 months ago at a completely different banking institution. He has been using it to pay for specialized out-of-pocket medical expenses. I looked down at the paper. It was an itemized invoice from a premium private obstetrics and gynecology clinic located across town. The patient name listed at the top of the invoice was Maya Evans. The billing code was for a comprehensive second trimester ultrasound and advanced fetal anatomy scan. Maya is not just his mistress, Arthur stated, delivering the final devastating blow with absolute precision. She is currently 6 months pregnant with his child. That is exactly why they rushed the condo purchase this week. They are actively nesting. I sat frozen in the heavy leather chair. The horrific words Loretta had screamed at me on the patio echoed violently in my head. She is a broken woman who cannot even give my son a child. She is barren. She needs to provide for the family financially, since she cannot provide an heir. Loretta knew. She had known everything all along. She had stood in front of her entire church committee and weaponized my deepest personal pain to publicly humiliate me, knowing full well that another woman was currently carrying her grandchild. Arthur tapped his silver pen against the desk, drawing my attention back to the documents. Look closely at the secondary charges on that medical invoice, Nia. I scanned the lower half of the paper. There was a recurring monthly charge from a high-end holistic pharmacy for premium prenatal vitamins and specialized maternity supplements. I looked at the specific credit card number used to pay for those recurring charges. It was not Jamal's hidden account. It was a card registered directly to Loretta. Your mother-in-law has been personally purchasing the prenatal vitamins for your husband's pregnant mistress for the last 5 months. Arthur said, she has been actively funding and supporting the secret pregnancy while living in your house, eating your food, and calling you barren to your face. The silence in the room was absolute. Mrs. Washington watched me closely, waiting to see if this final grotesque betrayal would be the thing that finally broke my spirit. She was waiting to see if I would crumble under the unbearable weight of their coordinated cruelty. I did not crumble. I reached out and carefully gathered all the documents, tapping the edges neatly against the desk to align them. I placed them back inside the red folder and closed it. The shock was entirely gone. The pain was completely erased. All that remained was a cold, calculating, unstoppable determination to absolutely decimate every single person who had participated in this profound deception. They want to play a dangerous game of shadows and secrets, I said, standing up from the desk and gripping the folder tightly in my hand. They want to steal my money to build a new family while keeping me trapped as their financial slave. I looked at Mrs. Washington and then at Arthur. Draw up the ultimate extraction plan today. I do not just want my money back. I want Jamal to lose his job at the bank. I want Loretta to lose her standing in the church and face federal tax charges. I want Kiara's fraudulent shell company exposed. I want to burn their entire false reality to the ground. And I want to salt the earth so nothing ever grows there again. Arthur nodded slowly, closing the black leather folder with a sharp snap that echoed like a gunshot in the quiet room. Mrs. Washington simply raised her crystal glass in a silent approving toast to my absolute resolve. I did not waste another second. I turned and walked out of the sprawling estate, my mind operating with the icy precision of a supercompute processing a battlefield strategy. I climbed into my car and drove directly toward the downtown financial district, where my public relations firm occupied the entire top floor of a sleek glass high-rise. The drive was a blur of shifting traffic and pouring sunlight, but my focus remained entirely locked on the execution of my extraction plan. I was no longer a betrayed wife. I was a corporate executioner. I stepped out of the private elevator and walked into the pristine minimalist lobby of my firm. The space was designed to project absolute power and unshakable competence. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of the city skyline. The floors were polished white marble and the furniture consisted of imported Italian leather sofas. Seated on one of those expensive white sofas, looking completely out of place and radiating a foul, desperate energy, were my brother-in-law, Andre, and his wife, Tara. They were leaning close together, whispering furiously, their eyes darting around the immaculate lobby like scavengers sizing up the loot in a captured castle. When the elevator doors dinged, their heads snapped up in unison. Tara instantly plastered a sickeningly sweet, entirely fake smile across her face. She stood up, smoothing down the fabric of a highly expensive silk blouse that I knew for a fact I had purchased for her birthday last year. Andre stood up right beside her, puffing out his chest and attempting to project the same hollow, unearned dominance his brother always used. I did not stop walking. I strode directly toward the heavy glass doors of my private corner office, forcing them to scramble to keep up with my rapid pace. My receptionist, a sharp young woman named Chloe, caught my eye and gave a slight questioning nod. I waved her off with a subtle flick of my wrist, signaling that I would handle the intruders myself. I pushed open my office door and walked behind my large mahogany desk. Andre and Tara followed me inside, completely uninvited, shutting the glass door behind them. Tara did not even wait for me to sit down before she launched her coordinated verbal assault. She crossed her arms over her chest, letting her brand-new designer handbag dangle prominently from her wrist. She looked around my luxurious office with a sneer of pure disdain, completely unimpressed by the undeniable physical proof of my hard work. "You are always hiding in this office," Tara said, her voice echoing loudly in the quiet room. Her tone was sharp and dripping with the exact same poisonous condescension Loretta had used on the patio yesterday. "It is honestly no wonder your marriage is falling apart in front of everyone. You wouldn't be working so hard if you could keep a man happy at home. Nia Jamal is looking for a real mother for his legacy. He needs a woman who actually understands family values instead of chasing corporate titles." She tilted her head, her eyes gleaming with malicious satisfaction. She absolutely knew about Maya. She knew about the secret pregnancy. She was actively participating in the cruel family conspiracy, twisting the knife into what she mistakenly believed was my deepest emotional vulnerability. She thought the mention of a real mother would cause me to break down in tears and surrender to their collective dominance. I did not flinch. I did not shed a single tear. I did not raise my voice or show a fraction of the emotional devastation she was desperately hoping to provoke. I simply stood behind my desk, resting my fingertips lightly on the cool mahogany wood, and looked at her with the clinical detachment of a scientist observing a particularly repulsive insect. "A real mother?" I asked softly. My voice was dangerously calm, completely devoid of any warmth or familial affection. The temperature in the spacious office seemed to plummet instantly. I let my eyes slowly travel up and down her body, performing a highly visible, deeply critical audit of her entire existence. "Tara, You are sitting here in my office holding a designer bag I bought you. You are wearing expensive clothes funded entirely by the 3 rounds of IVFI paid for in cash because Andre's brilliant real estate investments went completely bankrupt. Tara's smug smile vanished instantly. Her jaw dropped open in absolute shock. The color rapidly drained from her face, leaving her looking sickly and pale. She instinctively clutched the designer bag tighter against her chest, as if trying to physically shield herself from the harsh, undeniable truth of her complete financial dependency. Do not ever step into my professional workspace and lecture me on the concept of building a family legacy when your entire current lifestyle is funded directly by my paycheck. I continued my words, striking her like physical blows. You and your husband have spent the last 5 years living comfortably on my charity, while secretly plotting my downfall. You are parasites, Tara. You produce absolutely nothing and you consume everything in your path. Andre's face turned a violent, mottled shade of red. His fragile masculine ego, completely dependent on the false illusion of his own success, shattered instantly under the weight of my factual exposure. He stepped aggressively in front of his humiliated wife, closing the distance between us, and slamming his large hands flat down onto the surface of my pristine desk. He leaned in close, trying to use his physical size to intimidate me into silence. You think you are so incredibly smart because you make a little bit of corporate money, Andre snarled. His voice was rough and vibrating with pure, unadulterated rage. He was breathing heavily, trying to project absolute terror. But Jamal told me everything this morning. I know all about the $300,000. Jamal told me you found out about the withdrawal, and you are actively trying to freeze the accounts and lock up his rightful equity. You think you can just cut my brother off and financially starve this family out? You think you can ruin his plans for the future? I stared directly into his furious, bloodshot eyes, refusing to break eye contact or back away from his aggressive posture. I remained perfectly still, waiting for him to reveal the true nature of his desperate ambush. You are going to wire $50,000 into my personal checking account right now, Andre demanded. His voice dropped to a harsh, threatening whisper. He truly believed he possessed the ultimate leverage to break my resolve. If you do not wire me that hush money immediately, I am going to call the executive banking partners at Jamal's firm. I will tell his highly conservative bosses that your fancy public relations firm is currently under a massive criminal IRS investigation for severe tax fraud. I will tell them you are completely bankrupt and drowning in federal debt. He smiled, a dark, vicious twisting of his lips. The sheer audacity of his extortion attempt was staggering. He was planning to take his own mother's actual federal tax crimes and project them directly onto my pristine corporate reputation. I will drag your professional name through the absolute mud, Andre threatened, leaning even closer across the desk. I will ensure every single one of your wealthy multinational clients drops your firm by tomorrow morning. Your entire career will be completely ruined. You will lose this fancy office. You will lose your clients. And you will lose everything you have ever worked for. Why are the $50,000 right now Nia or I make the phone call that destroys your life? The silence in the room stretched out for several long, incredibly tense seconds. Andre held his aggressive stance, waiting for me to panic. He was waiting for me to grab my encrypted laptop and frantically transfer the extorted funds to protect my hard-earned corporate empire. He expected me to cower in fear at the thought of losing my elite clients. Instead of panicking, I felt a bright, brilliant wave of absolute triumph wash over my entire mind. The trap I had not even needed to set had just perfectly sprung itself. They had walked right into my stronghold and handed me the exact weapon I needed to destroy them. I let out a soft, genuine laugh. It was a warm, relaxed sound that completely shattered the hostile tension in the room. Andre flinched, his confident sneer, faltering as confusion clouded his eyes. Tara took a nervous step backward toward the glass door, suddenly realizing that they had waded into deep, highly dangerous waters without understanding the current. I stood up straight, smoothing the lapels of my tailored blazer, and offered Andre a bright, dazzling smile. "Oh, Andre," I said sweetly, my voice echoing with pure, unshakable confidence. "You really shouldn't threaten a senior crisis public relations executive with federal corporate extortion while standing inside her own bugged office." I slowly raised my hand and pointed a single, perfectly manicured finger directly toward the ceiling, right above his head. I pointed straight at the small, inconspicuous smoke detector mounted flush against the white drywall. Right in the center of the plastic casing, A tiny, brilliant red light was blinking with a steady, rhythmic pulse. The light indicated that the high-defined security camera and the military audio recording software were fully active, actively transmitting every single highly illegal threat he had just made directly to my secure, encrypted cloud server. The color vanished entirely from Andre's face. He slowly turned his head to look up at the blinking red light, and the horrific realization of his catastrophic mistake finally dawned in his wide, terrified eyes. He had just handed me a recorded federal felony on a silver platter. Andre stumbled backward toward the heavy glass door of my office, his face rapidly draining to the color of wet ash. He grabbed Tara tightly by the elbow and practically dragged her out of the corporate suite without saying another single word. I watched them flee toward the elevators, feeling an immense, powerful calm settle over my mind. They were completely outmatched and outgunned. I finished my afternoon meetings with perfect, unwavering focus, knowing the real battle was waiting for me at home. I arrived at the estate just after sunset. The house was unnervingly quiet, the kind of heavy silence that precedes a violent storm. I walked into the grand living room and found Jamal and Loretta waiting for me. They were seated side by side on the long, custom leather sofa, positioned exactly like a judge and jury, preparing to deliver a final, devastating verdict. Jamal did not greet me. He simply picked up a massive, thick legal binder and slapped it down hard onto the center of the glass coffee table. The heavy thud echoed loudly in the cavernous room. I looked down at the cover. Printed in bold black letters were the words, "The Washington Family Irrevocable Trust." "Sit down near," Jamal demanded. His voice was cold, sharp, and completely devoid of the fake warmth he usually deployed when he wanted to manipulate me. I sat in the armchair opposite them, keeping my expression perfectly neutral. Jamal leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, trying to physically dominate the space between us. "You have been acting entirely out of line lately. You are asking questions, pushing boundaries, and disrespecting my authority as the head of this household. That ends tonight. I had my banking attorneys drop these documents today. You are going to sign them right now." I looked at the binder, then back at my husband. "What exactly am I signing, Jamal?" I asked, maintaining a soft, subservient tone to mask the absolute fury burning in my chest. "You are transferring 100% of your public relations firm's equity directly into this family trust," he stated with staggering arrogance. "My mother and I will be listed as the primary controlling executives. We will manage the profits, oversee the corporate distributions, and ensure the wealth is properly allocated for the future legacy of this family name. You will receive a standard monthly allowance that we deem appropriate for your living expenses." I stared at him, letting the sheer audacity of his demand wash over me. He wanted me to legally surrender my entire multi-million-dollar corporate empire to a man who had just stolen my home equity to buy a luxury downtown condo for his pregnant mistress. "And what happens if I refuse to sign away the company I built from nothing?" I asked quietly. Jamal smiled a cruel, vicious stretching of his lips. "If you do not sign every single page of that trust right now, I will file for a highly publicized, incredibly messy divorce first thing tomorrow morning. I will demand permanent alimony since your corporate income vastly out-earns my basic banking salary. I will drag your pristine professional reputation through the absolute mud in open court. The judge will give me half of your precious business anyway simply because we are married. You will be completely ruined financially and professionally. Sign the papers, Nia, or lose everything." Loretta leaned forward, a triumphant gleam shining in her dark eyes. "You need to understand your place in this family," she added, her voice dripping with toxic venom. "You are a barren woman who cannot even fulfill her basic biological duties to my son. The absolute least you can do is submit your finances to the man who is gracious enough to keep you around. A good wife provides. Since you cannot provide an heir, you will provide the capital." I looked down at the heavy binder. I knew exactly what they wanted to see. They wanted to see me break. They needed the ultimate validation of their dominance over my life. I tapped into the deepest reserves of my crisis management training and began the performance of a lifetime. I let my shoulders slump forward, physically deflating in the armchair. I forced my breathing to become shallow and ragged. I blinked rapidly, allowing a pool of genuine-looking tears to well up in my eyes and spill over my cheeks. I let out a soft, defeated sob, covering my face with my hands as if the crushing weight of their threats had finally broken my spirit entirely. "Please, Jamal," I whispered, my voice shaking with perfectly manufactured fear and exhaustion. Please do not divorce me. I cannot lose my firm. I cannot handle a public scandal right now. I will do whatever you want. Just please do not leave me." Jamal leaned back against the leather sofa, crossing his arms over his chest puffed out with immense grotesque pride. He looked at his mother, sharing a look of absolute victory. They truly believed they had won. They thought they had successfully broken the high-powered executive and turned her back into an obedient, terrified servant. "Then sign the papers," Jamal commanded, gesturing toward the binder. "Sign them and we can move past this unfortunate phase of your disrespect." I wiped my tears with the back of my hand, sniffing loudly to maintain the illusion of total emotional collapse. I reached into my designer purse and pulled out my favorite luxury fountain pen. It was a sleek, heavy, matte black pen with gold trim. I uncapped it with trembling fingers. I pulled the heavy binder toward me and flipped open the cover. I made sure to let another tear drop directly onto the edge of the first page for added dramatic effect. I pressed the golden nib of the pen against the paper and began to sign. I signed the transfer of equity. I signed the executive assignments. I signed the asset forfeit clauses. I flipped through all 40 pages of the dense legal document, placing my signature exactly where Jamal pointed. Loretta watched me like a hawk, her eyes tracking every movement of the pen. She was practically salivating at the thought of controlling my corporate profits and dictating my monthly allowance. When I reached the final page, I placed the cap back on the pen and slid the binder across the glass table. I kept my eyes lowered to the floor, playing the role of the thoroughly defeated broken wife. Loretta snatched the binder off the table, instantly clutching it against her chest like a prized championship trophy. She stood up, smoothing down her skirt with a deeply satisfied smirk. "Finally, you understand your place," she said, her voice filled with pure, unadulterated contempt. "It took far too long, but we got there. Jamal, put these in the safe tonight. We will file them with the bank first thing Monday morning." Jamal stood up, looking down at me with a mixture of pity and extreme arrogance. "This is for the best, Nia. You will see. Now, dry your face and act like a normal person. I am going to help my mother carry these out to her car so she can take them to the safety deposit box tomorrow." They turned their backs on me and walked out of the living room, their footsteps echoing down the hallway toward the front door. They were chatting happily already, spending the millions of dollars they falsely believed they had just legally acquired from my life's work. The absolute second they were out of visual range, my posture changed instantly. I sat up perfectly straight. I reached up and efficiently wiped the remaining fake tears from my face, completely erasing the mask of the terrified broken wife. I looked down at the matte black fountain pen resting in my hand and smiled a cold, razor-sharp smile. The pen was a specialized corporate espionage tool gifted to me by a billionaire tech client who specialized in high-level security defense. The pen contained a highly advanced chemically engineered disappearing ink. It was exclusively designed for drafting confidential whiteboard strategies during hostile corporate takeovers. Every single drop of ink deployed from that specific pen fades completely into thin air after exactly 24 hours, leaving behind nothing but blank, pristine white paper. Furthermore, I had not even used my real legal signature. I had deliberately botched every single stroke, altering the slant, missing my middle initial, and using an entirely different cursive style that would absolutely fail any basic forensic handwriting analysis in a court of law. They were currently holding a binder full of absolutely worthless blank paper. I slipped the pen back into my purse, feeling the familiar, thrilling rush of adrenaline that only comes when a flawless counter-strategy is perfectly executed. The silence of the living room was broken by the sound of Jamal's heavy footsteps walking back down the hallway. He stopped in the arched doorway of the living room, looking at me with that same entitled, confident swagger. He had one hand resting casually on the doorframe. "By the way," Jamal said, his voice casual but firm, issuing a direct command, "we are hosting a massive 35th birthday and housewarming party here this Saturday. I have invited all the senior partners from the bank, Loretta's entire church committee, and all my fraternity brothers. Wear something nice. I want to show off my success." He turned and walked away before I could respond, leaving me alone in the quiet room. He truly wanted to pack my house full of his elite colleagues and his hypocritical mother's friends to celebrate a victory he had not actually won. He wanted to show off his success using the wealth he had violently tried to steal from me. A slow, dangerous smile spread across my face. A massive party full of the most important people in his entire professional and social life was absolutely perfect. It was the exact audience I needed for the grand finale. The next 48 hours became a masterclass in silent systemic destruction. I did not sleep. I operated on pure adrenaline and the flawless blueprints Arthur Vance had drafted for me. I arrived at my office before the sun even crested the city skyline, locked my heavy glass doors, and initiated the invisible war. My first call was not to a high-powered divorce attorney. It was directly to the white-collar crime division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Thanks to my extensive crisis PR work handling massive corporate scandals and mitigating financial disasters for Fortune 500 companies, I had direct personal contacts within the Bureau. I arranged a secure video conference with Special Agent Reynolds, a man known for his relentless pursuit of financial predators. I did not offer him tearful suspicions or emotional grievances. I presented him with a digitized, fully indexed forensic dossier. I walked him through the precise timeline of the forged home equity line of credit. I showed him the time-stamped security footage of Jamal sneaking into my home office to access my private safe. I showed him the fraudulent Delaware shell company registered to Kiara just days prior. Agent Reynolds was highly intrigued, taking rapid notes as I laid out the indisputable paper trail. When I pointed out that the stolen funds were wired across state lines to fund a luxury real estate transaction and subsequently used to pay off a federal tax debt for Loretta, his professional demeanor shifted into high gear. Wire, fraud across state lines combined with IRS evasion elevates a messy domestic dispute into a full-blown federal criminal investigation. Jamal and Loretta had crossed a line they could never uncross. Agent Reynolds requested the raw files immediately, assuring me that an official inquiry would be launched within the hour. With the federal trap officially set and quietly ticking in the background, I moved to the immediate tactical strike. I dialed the executive fraud department of the financial institution, currently holding the escrow account for Maya Evans's luxury downtown condo. I bypassed the standard customer service representatives and utilized my corporate credentials to demand to speak directly with the vice president of risk management. I identified myself as the primary account holder of the illegally accessed HELOC. I formally reported a $300,000 fraudulent wire transfer, citing specific banking regulations and federal compliance codes. I informed the bank executive that the FBI was currently opening an active file on the transaction and that any institution facilitating the transfer of these stolen assets would be listed as an accessory to federal wire fraud. The response was immediate and violently effective. Major financial institutions absolutely despise federal scrutiny and the threat of complicity. Within 14 minutes of my phone call, the bank initiated a hard, irrevocable lockdown. They triggered a Level 5 fraud alert across their entire internal network. The funds sitting in Maya's escrow account were entirely frozen. I checked the digital clock on my wall. It was exactly 10:00 the morning. Maya and Jamal were scheduled to sign the final closing documents at noon. They were mere hours away from securing their stolen love nest. Now they were walking blindly into a solid brick wall. I spent the rest of the morning casually answering emails, reviewing PR campaigns for my top-tier clients, and feeling the glorious, quiet hum of a perfectly executed strategy settling into my bones. The frantic explosive fallout was inevitable, and I was perfectly positioned to watch it detonate. By 2:00 the afternoon, the shockwave finally reached my doorstep. I was reviewing a quarterly earnings report when I heard a sharp escalating commotion outside my heavy office doors. My receptionist, Chloe, was using her sternest professional voice, demanding that an unauthorized visitor stop immediately. The heavy glass door to my office was violently shoved open, bouncing off the rubber wall stop with a loud thud. Maya Evans stood in the doorway. She was breathing heavily, her face flushed with a mixture of raw panic and unadulterated entitlement. She was wearing a tight, highly expensive maternity dress, clearly purchased with my stolen equity, and holding a designer handbag that looked suspiciously similar to the one I had seen on Tara. She stepped into my sanctuary, completely ignoring Chloe, who was frantically apologizing to me from the hallway. I waved Chloe off, gesturing for her to simply close the door and return to her desk. Maya walked right up to the center of my office. She did not look like a woman who had just had her real estate dreams crushed by a bank teller. She looked like a woman who believed she still held the ultimate winning hand and had come to force a surrender. She deliberately rested her hand on her swollen belly, rubbing it in a slow, highly calculated circular motion. She wanted to ensure I was acutely aware of the biological victory she held over me. She wanted to weaponize her pregnancy just as Loretta had weaponized my infertility. You really think you are so smart? Namaya said, her voice dripping with a sickeningly sweet, deeply condescending tone. She paced back and forth in front of my desk, assessing my luxurious corner office with naked, burning envy. Jamal warned me you were going to throw a massive temper tantrum when you found out about the money. He told me you would try to make things difficult because you are a bitter, aging woman who cannot accept when she has been replaced. I did not speak. I simply sat back in my leather ergonomic chair, folded my hands neatly in my lap, and let her talk. I had learned long ago that if you let a narcissist speak long enough, they will always hand you the exact rope you need to hang them. You need to step aside, Nehemiah demanded, stopping directly in front of me and leaning aggressively over my polished mahogany desk. You need to accept reality and stop trying to fight a war you have already completely lost. Jamal's family chose me. They want me. Loretta calls me her real daughter-in-law. She takes me to lunch at the country club. She buys my expensive prenatal vitamins. She actually cares about the future of the Washington bloodline and the legacy her son is building. You are nothing to them. You are just a paycheck. You are just the bank. She laughed, a sharp grating sound that echoed unpleasantly off the glass walls. You are a cold, empty corporate machine. Jamal is exhausted by you. He is tired of coming home to a sterile house and a wife who cares more about PR campaigns than building a family. He is looking for a real mother for his legacy. He wants a warm home filled with children, something you are biologically incapable of providing. So do yourself a huge favor and preserve whatever tiny shred of dignity you have left. Sign the divorce papers Jamal is drafting. Leave the house quietly. Give us the money we need to raise this baby properly, and maybe we will let you keep a fraction of this PR firm to keep yourself busy. Maya stood up straight, crossing her arms and resting them above her pregnant belly. She looked at me with an expression of pure, triumphant victory. She was waiting for me to shatter. She was waiting for the barren, betrayed wife to break down in hysteric scream-cry and ultimately concede total defeat to the younger, fertile mistress who had stolen her life. I slowly leaned forward, picked up my porcelain coffee mug, and took a long, incredibly casual sip of my dark roast coffee. The ceramic clicked softly against the wood as I set it back down. Without breaking eye contact, I reached under my desk and pressed the silent security button wired directly to the building's executive lobby guards. I looked up at Maya, offering her a smile so incredibly warm, relaxed, and genuinely untroubled that it caused her confident posture to immediately falter. I do not need to step aside, Maya, I said, my voice smooth as silk and vibrating with absolute undeniable authority. I am exactly where I belong, but you might want to pick up your phone and call your realtor immediately. Maya frowned, her perfectly arched eyebrows furrowing in deep confusion. What are you talking about? She snapped the sweet, triumphant facade, beginning to rapidly crack under the weight of my absolute calm. I leaned across the desk, locking my eyes onto hers with the precision of a sniper. I hear escrow bounces violently when the Federal Bureau of Investigation freezes stolen funds for active wire fraud. The color drained from Maya's face so fast she looked like she might physically collapse onto my office floor. Her jaw dropped open, but no sound came out. The arrogant, triumphant mistress vanished instantly, completely replaced by a terrified, hyperventilating woman who suddenly realized she had just built her entire future on a fragile foundation of federal crimes. She looked down at her shaking hands, then back up at me, her eyes wide with mounting, suffocating panic. The reality of the frozen bank accounts, the lost luxury condo, and the looming federal investigation crashed down on her all at once. At that exact moment, my office doors opened. Two large, imposing security guards in dark tactical suits stepped into the room. They moved with absolute, silent precision, flanking Maya on either side before she could even process their arrival. Escort this woman out of my building, I commanded, never taking my eyes off Mia's horrified, ashen face. If she ever sets foot on this property or attempts to contact my staff again, have her immediately arrested for criminal trespassing. Mia could not even muster the breath to argue. She was completely paralyzed by the realization that her stolen luxury life was actively disintegrating into dust. The guards each took her firmly by an arm. She stumbled backward, her designer heels dragging awkwardly against the pristine marble floor as they physically turned her around and marched her out of my office. I watched her get dragged through the busy lobby, her face pale and slack with profound shock. She had walked in aggressively, demanding my surrender and attempting to steal my dignity. She was leaving with the crushing, inescapable knowledge that the invisible war had already been decisively won, and she was nothing more than unfortunate collateral damage. Saturday morning arrived with a crisp, brilliant blue sky that completely belied the absolute devastation scheduled for the afternoon. I woke up early, stepping into my massive chef's kitchen to brew a simple cup of dark roast coffee. I wanted to enjoy the final few moments of pristine silence before the parasite swarm descended upon my property. I stood at the marble island, watching the morning light filter through the expansive glass patio doors, feeling an incredible sense of calm. The invisible war was fully in motion. Every trap was set. Every wire was tripped. I just had to play my part for a few more hours. At exactly 8 inches the morning, the heavy mahogany front doors swung open without a single knock. Loretta marched into my grand foyer like a conquering general returning from a victorious campaign. She was closely followed by a massive, chaotic crew of high-end caterers. They were hauling heavy silver warming trays, boxes of crystal serving platters, and towering, ostentatious floral arrangements that clashed horribly with my elegant minimalist decor. Loretta strutted directly into my kitchen, waving her hands wildly and barking aggressive orders at the bewildered catering staff. She wore a bright, incredibly flashy sequin top and carried herself with the unearned arrogance of a woman who falsely believed she had just secured a multi-million-dollar corporate empire. "Get out of the way," Loretta snapped, waving her hand at me as if swatting away an annoying insect. "The caterers need space to set up the prime rib carving stations. This party is to celebrate my son's brilliance. Everything needs to be utterly perfect for the church elders and the bank executives. We cannot have you cluttering up the workspace." I took a slow sip of my coffee, stepping back from the marble island to give her the floor. I watched as she aggressively instructed the catering manager to clear out my expensive organic groceries from the industrial refrigerator to make room for her highly catered appetizers. The catering manager shot me a deeply apologetic look, clearly recognizing who actually owned the estate. I simply offered him a warm, reassuring smile and gave a slight nod, giving him silent permission to humor the delusional woman barking orders at him. "I will stay entirely out of your way, Loretta," I said, my voice dripping with manufactured submissiveness. "I want today to be exactly what Jamal deserves." Loretta scoffed, turning her back on me to inspect a tray of bacon-wrapped scallops. "That is the smartest thing you have said all week. Just stay out of sight until it is time to serve the guests." As I walked out of the kitchen, I nearly collided with Jamal's younger sister, Kiara. She was parading through my formal dining room, holding a phone attached to a long selfie stick. She was dressed in a highly inappropriate, incredibly revealing designer outfit that I knew for a fact she had purchased using the fraudulent Delaware Shell Company account. She was spinning around in circles, showing off my custom crystal chandelier and my imported Italian dining table to her live audience. "Hey guys!" Kiara shouted into her phone, her voice echoing loudly through the first floor of the house. "Welcome to the new mansion my brother bought for the family. Black wealth is real. We are out here thriving. Jamal just closed a massive deal, and we are celebrating big today. Wait until you see the custom outdoor kitchen he built for us." I stood quietly in the hallway watching her live stream, her completely fabricated reality to her thousands of eager followers. She was literally broadcasting her location and claiming ownership of assets that were completely funded by my personal paycheck. She was basking in the fake glory of a brother who had used her name to commit federal wire fraud. I felt a brief, fleeting moment of pity for her absolute ignorance, but it evaporated instantly. Kiara had happily participated in the theft. She had willingly allowed Jamal to use her identity to funnel my hard-earned equity into a shell account. She was about to learn a very brutal, highly public lesson about the severe consequences of corporate fraud. I walked past her without saying a word, making my way out to the expansive travertine backyard patio. The caterers were already setting up a massive outdoor bar and arranging high-top tables around the custom landscaped pool. I walked over to the large outdoor entertainment pavilion and began unpacking a series of heavy black Pelican cases. Jamal stepped out onto the patio a few minutes later. He was wearing a sharply tailored custom linen suit that hugged his shoulders perfectly. He looked incredibly handsome, polished, and reeking of absolute toxic arrogance. He surveyed the bustling catering crew and the luxurious setup with a deeply satisfied smirk. He truly believed he was the undisputed king of this castle. He truly believed the blank papers locked inside his mother's safety deposit box had successfully transferred my entire corporate empire into his hands. He walked over to the pavilion where I was carefully assembling a massive high-defin LED screen and connecting it to a heavy-duty outdoor projector. He looked down at me, adjusting his expensive silk pocket square. "What are you doing out here?" Jamal asked, his tone laced with heavy suspicion. "I told you to get dressed and make yourself presentable for my banking colleagues." I kept my head down, meticulously connecting a thick HDMI cable to the back of the projector. "I am just setting up the audio-visual equipment for your party." "Jamal," I said, keeping my voice incredibly soft and utterly devoted. "I know how important this day is for your career and for your legacy. I have prepared a very special tribute slideshow to play during your toast. I want all of your executives and all of Loretta's church friends to see exactly what kind of man you really are." Jamal's suspicious scowl instantly melted into a massive ego-driven smile. He puffed out his chest, highly pleased by my apparent total submission. He genuinely thought my spirit was completely broken after the fake trust signing last night. He believed I was desperately trying to win back his favor by orchestrating a public tribute to his greatness. "Well," Jamal said, smoothing his lapel and looking out over the pool area, "make sure the audio is loud enough for everyone to hear it clearly. I want the regional director to see that my household is perfectly managed. Do not embarrass me today, Nia. Play the perfect quiet hostess. Serve the drink, smile at the wives, and stay out of the business conversations. I will be absolutely flawless, Jamal," I promised, finally looking up at him with a wide, bright smile. "No one will ever forget this party. I can guarantee you that." He gave a sharp, dismissive nod and turned away, strutting back toward the house to greet the first wave of early arrivals. I turned back to the projector, booting up the system and syncing it directly to my secure encrypted tablet. I ran a quick diagnostic check to ensure the connection was absolutely unbreakable. The massive LED screen flickered to life, displaying a simple, elegant title card that read, "A Tribute to Jamal Washington." The afternoon progressed exactly as they had planned. The sprawling estate rapidly filled with highly influential guests. Loretta's deeply judgmental Women of Faith Committee arrived in their Sunday best, sipping expensive champagne and loudly praising Loretta for raising such an incredibly successful son. The senior banking executives from Jamal's firm arrived in their casual weekend luxury wear, smoking imported cigars on my patio and clapping Jamal on the back. Andre and Tara arrived looking incredibly nervous and avoiding my gaze entirely, clearly still terrified from the catastrophic threat failure in my office yesterday. I played my assigned role with absolute terrifying perfection. I glided through the crowded patio, offering warm smiles, refreshing drinks, and playing the part of the incredibly lucky, supportive wife. I let Jamal hold court by the outdoor kitchen, listening to him loudly brag to his regional director about his incredible financial acumen and his brilliant investment strategies. I watched Loretta proudly parade around the pool, taking full credit for the luxurious surroundings. The air was thick with the smell of roasted meats, expensive perfumes, and massive unearned egos. Everyone was laughing, drinking, and completely oblivious to the massive anvil hanging directly over their heads. I stepped back into the shadows of the outdoor pavilion, standing quietly next to my encrypted tablet. I looked out over the sea of guests, observing the specific locations of Jamal, Loretta, and Kiara. They were all clustered together near the center of the patio, laughing loudly with the regional bank director and the head of the church committee, the perfect captive audience. Suddenly, a sharp rhythmic vibration pulsed against my left wrist. I looked down at my sleek smartwatch. A highly encrypted secure text message illuminated the small digital screen. It was a direct communication from Special Agent Reynolds at the FBI White Collar Crime Division. I tapped the screen, opening the message. "Warrants are signed for bank fraud and identity theft. We are 3 blocks away. Give the signal when you're ready." I stared at the glowing green letters on my watch, feeling an incredible ice-cold wave of pure adrenaline surge through my veins. The trap was fully loaded. The authorities were waiting right outside the gates. The entire parasitic family was gathered together in one highly confined, highly public space. I looked up from my watch and stared directly at Jamal. He was laughing with his boss holding a glass of scotch, completely unaware that his entire fraudulent existence was about to be violently eradicated. I slowly reached out and placed my hand over the master control panel of the outdoor audio-visual system. I took one final deep breath, savoring the last remaining second of their false reality. It was time to bring the house down. The rest of my Friday afternoon passed in a state of absolute uninterrupted tranquility. Maya's humiliating expulsion from my corporate headquarters was merely a precursor, a tiny tremor before the massive earthquake scheduled for the following day. I packed up my briefcase precisely at 5, drove back to my sprawling estate, and prepared myself mentally for the ultimate performance. Saturday morning arrived with a crisp, brilliant blue sky that completely belied the absolute devastation scheduled for the afternoon. I woke up early, stepping into my massive chef's kitchen to brew a simple cup of dark roast coffee. I wanted to enjoy the final few moments of pristine silence before the parasite swarm descended upon my property. At exactly 8 inches the morning, the heavy mahogany front doors swung open without a single knock. Loretta marched into my grand foyer like a conquering general returning from a victorious campaign. She was closely followed by a massive, chaotic crew of high-end caterers. They were hauling heavy silver warming trays, boxes of crystal serving platters, and towering, ostentatious floral arrangements that clashed horribly with my elegant, minimalist decor. Loretta strutted directly into my kitchen, waving her hands wildly and barking aggressive orders at the bewildered catering staff. She wore a bright, incredibly flashy sequined top and carried herself with the unearned arrogance of a woman who falsely believed she had just secured a multi-million-dollar corporate empire. She pointed a sharp, manicured finger at the lead chef, demanding he set up a ridiculous over-the-top caviar station right next to the imported marble island. "Get out of the way!" Nia Loretta snapped, waving her hand at me as if swatting away an annoying insect. "The caterers need space. This party is to celebrate my son's brilliance. Everything needs to be utterly perfect for the church elders and the bank executives. We cannot have you cluttering up the workspace and ruining the aesthetic." I took a slow sip of my coffee, stepping back from the marble island to give her the floor. I watched as she aggressively instructed the catering manager to clear out my expensive organic groceries from the industrial refrigerator to make room for her highly catered, absurdly expensive appetizers. The catering manager shot me a deeply apologetic look, clearly recognizing who actually owned the estate and paid the bills. I simply offered him a warm, reassuring smile and gave a slight nod, giving him silent permission to humor the delusional woman barking orders at him. "I will stay entirely out of your way, Loretta," I said, my voice dripping with manufactured submissiveness. "I want today to be exactly what Jamal deserves." Loretta scoffed, turning her back on me to inspect a tray of bacon-wrapped scallops. "That is the smartest thing you have said all week. Just stay out of sight until it is time to serve the guests." As I walked out of the kitchen, I nearly collided with Jamal's younger sister, Kiara. She was parading through my formal dining room holding a phone attached to a long selfie stick. She was dressed in a highly inappropriate, incredibly revealing designer outfit that I knew for a fact she had purchased using the fraudulent Delaware Shell Company account. She was spinning around in circles, showing off my custom crystal chandelier and my imported Italian dining table to her live audience. "Hey guys," Kiara shouted into her phone, her voice echoing loudly through the first floor of the house. "Welcome to the new mansion my brother bought for the family. Black wealth is real. We are out here thriving. Jamal just closed a massive deal and we are celebrating big today. Wait until you see the custom outdoor kitchen he built for us. It is absolutely insane. My brother is a literal king." I stood quietly in the hallway watching her live stream her completely fabricated reality to her thousands of eager followers. She was literally broadcasting her location and claiming ownership of assets that were completely funded by my personal paycheck. She was basking in the fake glory of a brother who had used her name to commit federal wire fraud. I felt a brief, fleeting moment of pity for her absolute ignorance, but it evaporated instantly. Kiara had happily participated in the theft. She had willingly allowed Jamal to use her identity to funnel my hard-earned equity into a shell account. She was about to learn a very brutal, highly public lesson about the severe consequences of corporate fraud. I walked past her without saying a word, making my way out to the expansive travertine backyard patio. The caterers were already setting up a massive outdoor bar, stocking it with top-shelf liquor and arranging high-top tables around the custom landscaped pool. I walked over to the large outdoor entertainment pavilion and began unpacking a series of heavy black Pelican cases. Jamal stepped out onto the patio a few minutes later. He was wearing a sharply tailored custom linen suit that hugged his shoulders perfectly. He looked incredibly handsome, polished, and reeking of absolute toxic arrogance. He surveyed the bustling catering crew, the floral arrangements, and the luxurious setup with a deeply satisfied smirk. He truly believed he was the undisputed king of this castle. He truly believed the blank papers locked inside his mother's safety deposit box had successfully transferred my entire corporate empire into his hands. He walked over to the pavilion where I was carefully assembling a massive high-definition LED screen and connecting it to a heavy-duty outdoor projector. He looked down at me, adjusting his expensive silk pocket square with a smug expression. "What are you doing out here?" Jamal asked, his tone laced with heavy suspicion. "I told you to get dressed and make yourself presentable for my banking colleagues." I kept my head down, meticulously connecting a thick HDMI cable to the back of the projector. "I am just setting up the audio-visual equipment in the backyard." "Jamal," I said, keeping my voice incredibly soft and utterly devoted. "I know how important this day is for your career and for your legacy. I have prepared a very special tribute slideshow to play during your toast. I want all of your executives and all of Loretta's church friends to see exactly what kind of man you really are." Jamal's suspicious scowl instantly melted into a massive, ego-driven smile. He puffed out his chest, highly pleased by my apparent total submission. He genuinely thought my spirit was completely broken after the fake trust signing last night. He believed I was desperately trying to win back his favor by orchestrating a public tribute to his greatness. "Well," Jamal said, smoothing his lapel and looking out over the pool area. "Make sure the audio is loud enough for everyone to hear it clearly. I want the regional director to see that my household is perfectly managed. Do not embarrass me today, Nia. Play the perfect quiet hostess. Serve the drinks, smile at the wives, and stay out of the business conversations. I will be absolutely flawless." "Jamal," I promised, finally looking up at him with a wide, bright smile. "No one will ever forget this party. I can guarantee you that." He gave a sharp, dismissive nod and turned away, strutting back toward the house to greet the first wave of early arrivals. I turned back to the projector, booting up the system and syncing it directly to my secure encrypted tablet. I ran a quick diagnostic check to ensure the connection was absolutely unbreakable. The massive LED screen flickered to life, displaying a simple, elegant title card that read, "A Tribute to Jamal Washington." The afternoon progressed exactly as they had planned. The sprawling estate rapidly filled with highly influential guests. Over 200 people spilled across the travertine patio and manicured lawns. Loretta's deeply judgmental Women of Faith Committee arrived in their Sunday best, sipping expensive champagne and loudly praising Loretta for raising such an incredibly successful son. The senior banking executives from Jamal's firm arrived in their casual weekend luxury wear, smoking imported cigars on my patio and clapping Jamal on the back. Kiara's local sponsors hovered near the catering stations, desperately trying to network their way into what they assumed was legitimate high society. I played my assigned role with absolute terrifying perfection. I glided through the crowded patio, offering warm smiles, refreshing drinks, and playing the part of the incredibly lucky, supportive wife. I let Jamal hold court by the outdoor kitchen, listening to him loudly brag to his regional director about his incredible financial acumen and his brilliant investment strategies. I watched Loretta proudly parade around the pool, taking full credit for the luxurious surroundings, telling everyone how she had personally designed the landscaping. The air was thick with the smell of roasted meats, expensive perfumes, and massive, unearned egos. Everyone was laughing, drinking, and completely oblivious to the massive anvil hanging directly over their heads. I stepped back into the shadows of the outdoor pavilion, standing quietly next to my encrypted tablet. I looked out over the sea of guests, observing the specific locations of Jamal, Loretta, and Kiara. They were all clustered together near the center of the patio, laughing loudly with the regional bank director and the head of the church committee, the perfect captive audience. Suddenly, a sharp rhythmic vibration pulsed against my left wrist. I looked down at my sleek smartwatch. A highly encrypted, secure text message illuminated the small digital screen. It was a direct communication from Special Agent Reynolds at the FBI White Collar Crime Division. I tapped the screen, opening the message. "Warrants are signed for bank fraud and identity theft. We are 3 blocks away. Give the signal when you're ready." I pressed my thumb against the edge of my smartwatch, dismissing the federal agent's text message, and looked up just as the crowd began to applaud. Jamal was making his way to the center of the large wooden stage we had erected over the shallow end of the pool. He held a crystal flute filled with vintage champagne, his linen suit catching the afternoon sun perfectly. He tapped the microphone, demanding the attention of the 200 highly influential guests packed onto my patio. The silence that fell over the yard was immediate and respectful. The senior partners from his investment bank leaned forward, eager to hear from their rising star. Jamal delivered a masterclass in narcissistic delusion. He spoke for 10 agonizing minutes about his relentless grind, his brilliant financial foresight, and his unwavering dedication to building a legacy of generational wealth. He spun a fabricated tale of late nights, brilliant market strategies, and the heavy burden of being a self-made man providing for his family. He thanked his colleagues. He thanked his mother. He thanked God. He did not mention my name a single time. I stood in the shadows of the audiovisual pavilion, my face a mask of pleasant neutrality, watching him bask in the stolen glory. As Jamal raised his glass for a final toast, Loretta practically shoved her way onto the stage. She snatched the microphone from his hand, her sequined top flashing aggressively in the sunlight. God blesses the righteous, Loretta announced, her voice booming over the premium speakers thick with pious hypocrisy. The church elders in the front row nodded their heads in solemn agreement. My son is the true head of this household. He is a provider, a protector, and a man who understands the importance of building a strong, fruitful legacy. And to celebrate his massive success today, we have a very special performance from someone incredibly close to our hearts. The crowd parted slightly as Maya Evans stepped forward. She walked up the wooden steps to the stage, moving with a slow, deliberate sway to emphasize the swell of her pregnant belly. She wore a flowing, expensive silk maternity gown that caught the breeze, looking every bit the proud, expectant matriarch. The disrespect was absolute, intentional, and entirely public. She stood right next to my husband, taking the microphone from Loretta with a shy, manufactured smile. Maya signaled the hired DJ, and a soft, acoustic instrumental track began to play. She sang a romantic, soulful ballad, keeping her eyes locked directly on Jamal the entire time. It was a grotesque display of affection, a public claiming of my husband and my territory right in front of my own guests. Jamal stared back at her, his eyes shining with pride, completely validating her presence to his conservative banking colleagues and his mother's highly judgmental church committee. They were rubbing my face in the dirt, entirely convinced that they had broken my spirit and stolen my empire. As Maya hit the final soaring note, the crowd erupted into polite, enthusiastic applause. Jamal wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her close for the cameras. That was my cue. I stepped out of the shadows of the pavilion and walked calmly, deliberately through the crowd. I climbed the wooden stairs to the stage, my posture perfectly straight, my expression composed and lethal. Jamal looked slightly confused as I approached, but he maintained his arrogant smirk, likely assuming I was coming up to offer a pathetic, defeated wife's congratulations. I reached out and firmly took the microphone directly from Jamal's hand before he could even process the movement. Thank you, Maya, for that beautiful performance, I said, my voice echoing crisply across the silent yard, entirely devoid of emotion. And thank you, Jamal, for talking so passionately about the importance of generational wealth. I think it is only appropriate that we look at exactly how you build it. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small wireless remote connected to the master control panel. I pressed the central execution button. The massive LED projector screen behind us did not show the heartwarming birthday tribute Jamal had been expecting. The screen flickered and instantly displayed the high, digitally enhanced hidden camera footage from my private home office. The audio routed through the massive concert speakers hit the crowd like a physical shockwave. Once you process that equity line, we will fund Kiara's lifestyle brand. Jamal's recorded voice boomed across the manicured lawn. His face, blown up to 10 feet tall, looked greedy, calculating, and malicious as he stood over my open safe. Loretta's sharp, vindictive voice immediately followed, ringing out with crystal clarity. And then we will throw her out on the street exactly where a barren, useless woman belongs. The panic was instantaneous and catastrophic. The crowd gasped in unison, a sharp intake of air from 200 people. The senior pastor of Loretta's megachurch, a man who had just been vigorously nodding at her righteous speech, froze completely. The expensive porcelain appetizer plate he was holding slipped through his fingers, shattering against the travertine patio with a loud, violent crash. Jamal turned the color of wet cement. The blood rushed from his face, leaving him looking sickly and hollow. He stared up at the massive screen, his mouth opening and closing as his brain struggled to process the total annihilation of his public image. He whipped his head around, seeing his senior banking partners staring at him with absolute, unadulterated professional horror. He let out a guttural sound of pure panic and lunged directly for the audiovisual equipment tent, desperate to physically destroy the servers and cut the feed. He never made it past the edge of the stage. Two massive, highly trained private security guards stepped out from the sides of the pavilion. I had hired them early that morning, explicitly instructing them to remain invisible until the trap was sprung. They wore perfectly tailored dark suits and moved with terrifying coordinated efficiency. They stepped directly into Jamal's path, planting their feet like concrete pillars. Jamal slammed into them, bouncing backward and stumbling awkwardly onto the wooden deck. He screamed at them to move out of his way, but they remained completely silent. Their arms crossed effortlessly, blocking his path to the controls. I did not stop. I did not hesitate. I pressed the second button on my remote. The screen instantly changed. The video vanished, replaced by highly magnified, incredibly clear digital scans of forensic financial documents. I had optimized the contrast so that every single damning number was visible all the way from the back fence. The first document to flash across the screen was the official federally stamped IRS tax lien. Loretta Washington's name was highlighted in glowing yellow directly next to the staggering 6F-figure federal tax debt she had kept fiercely hidden from her wealthy, judgmental church friends. I saw several of the Women of Faith Committee members physically recoil, taking deliberate steps away from Loretta as if she were suddenly highly contagious. The screen flashed again. This time, it displayed the undeniable heavily stamped bank traces. It showed the exact digitized flow of funds, $300,000 moving from the fraudulent Delaware shell company directly into the escrow account registered to Maya Evans. I lifted the microphone back to my lips, my voice slicing through the rising tide of panicked murmurs and frantic whispers. For everyone wondering, I announced maintaining direct, unwavering eye contact with the regional director of Jamal's bank. The black excellence you are celebrating tonight was not built through hard work or brilliant market strategies. It was funded entirely by identity theft, federal wire fraud, and the systematic criminal exploitation of my personal paycheck. The backyard descended into absolute unprecedented chaos. The regional bank director immediately pulled his phone from his pocket, furiously dialing his legal compliance team while walking rapidly toward the front gates. Jamal was a radioactive liability. His career in finance was effectively dead, cremated on the spot in front of his peers. Loretta was hyperventilating by the catering station, clutching her chest as her church friends openly glared at her with profound disgust. Maya stood frozen on the stage next to me, her hands covering her face, finally realizing the true scope of the disaster she had happily married into. The noise was deafening, a cacophony of shouting, breaking glass, and hurried footsteps as influential guests scrambled to distance themselves from the unfolding federal crime scene. Then a shrill, hysterical scream pierced the noise. Kiara shoved her way violently through the stunned crowd, storming right up to the front edge of the stage. She was still clutching her long selfie stick, her phone actively live-streaming the entire catastrophic implosion of her family to her thousands of internet followers. Her face was twisted in a mask of furious, desperate denial. The reality of the situation was too massive for her to comprehend, so she fell back on the one thing she thought still protected them. "You are a liar," Kiara screamed, pointing her phone directly at my face, her voice cracking with hysteria. "You are a bitter, jealous hater making up fake documents because my brother is leaving you for a real woman. He already won. We already won. You signed your entire PR firm over to us in the Washington Family Trust last night. I saw the papers. My mom has them locked in the bank vault right now. You have absolutely nothing left. You are completely broke." I looked down at Kiara, feeling a slow, dangerous smile spread across my face. Her absolute confidence in their stolen victory was the perfect, flawless setup for the grand finale. I turned and walked over to the small podium where I had rested my belongings. I reached down and picked up the heavy, thick leather binder Jamal had forced upon me the night before. I walked back to the edge of the stage, standing directly in front of Kiara's live streaming camera. I held the binder up high so every single remaining guest and every single person watching her broadcast online could see the bold black letters printed on the cover. I looked down into Kiara's terrified eyes and slowly flipped the heavy cover open. I turned past the title page. I flipped to the transfer of equity section. I flipped to the executive assignments. I opened the binder entirely, holding it wide open, turning it slowly so the camera could capture every single inch of the interior. The pages were completely flawlessly white. Every single stroke of ink, Every forged signature, every fraudulent transfer of assets I had written the night before had vanished into thin air. The advanced, chemically engineered disappearing ink had worked exactly as my tech client promised, leaving behind nothing but a dense stack of worthless, empty, pristine paper. Kiara stared at the blank pages through the lens of her smartphone. The live chat on her screen exploded with thousands of comments, a relentless waterfall of mocking emojis and brutal insults. Her followers were witnessing the real-time destruction of her fake empire. She dropped the selfie stick. The expensive phone hit the hard stone patio with a sickening crack, the screen splintering into a spiderweb of broken glass. Kiara fell to her knees beside it, her hands hovering over the ruined device, unable to comprehend that her entire identity had just evaporated. On the stage, Jamal looked like a man who had just been forcefully awoken from a deep drug-induced sleep. His eyes darted wildly from the blank binder in my hands to the massive projector screen displaying his crimes, and finally to the sea of horrified faces staring up at him. The arrogant, untouchable king of finance was gone. In his place stood a pathetic, sweating fraud, realizing he had built his entire future on a foundation of absolute vapor. He had handed me the gun, loaded it himself, and begged me to pull the trigger. The heavy, suffocating silence hanging over the yard was abruptly shattered by the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps. Richard Sterling, the regional director of Jamal's investment bank, pushed his way to the very front of the crowd. He was a man who practically bled institutional power, and his face was currently a mask of pure, unadulterated revulsion. He looked up at the stage, his gaze locking onto Jamal like a predator, zeroing in on wounded prey. The other senior executives flanked him, forming a formidable wall of corporate condemnation. You committed wire fraud. Richard's voice was dangerously low, slicing through the tension like a scalpel. He did not yell. He did not have to. The quiet fury in his tone commanded absolute attention. You used this firm's internal network to execute identity theft against your own wife. You brought federal investigators to my doorstep. Jamal frantically wiped the sweat from his forehead, holding his hands up in a desperate pleading gesture. Richard, please, you have to listen to me. This is a massive misunderstanding. She is doctoring those documents. I am a top earner. I brought in the Miller account. I can fix this. Just let me make a phone call to legal. You do not have a legal department anymore, Richard stated, his voice echoing with absolute finality. You are a liability, a criminal, and an embarrassment to my institution. You are fired, Jamal. Effective immediately. Don't even bother coming to the office to pack. Security will box up your desk and leave it on the curb by Monday morning. If you ever contact anyone at my firm again, I will personally ensure you are sued into oblivion. Jamal opened his mouth to argue, but no words came out. He was watching his lucrative career, his prestige, and his entire professional identity burn to the ground in front of a live audience. He staggered backward, gripping the wooden railing of the stage for support, his breathing shallow and rapid. Before Jamal could even process the professional execution, another figure stepped forward from the stunned crowd. Pastor Thomas, the impeccably dressed leader of Loretta's megachurch, stood clutching his gold-leafed Bible. His face was a picture of righteous indignation. He turned away from the stage and directed his full, thunderous fury entirely at Loretta. Loretta was still hyperventilating near the outdoor bar, desperately trying to hide behind a towering floral arrangement. Her fellow church committee members had completely abandoned her, forming a tight, judgmental circle several yards away. Sister Loretta, the pastor, boomed his voice, vibrating with theatrical condemnation. You have paraded around my congregation for years, preaching about family values and spiritual purity. Yet the truth is displayed right here for the entire world to witness. You conspired to steal from your own daughter-in-law. You harbored a fugitive tax debt. Loretta shook her head wildly, tears streaming down her carefully powdered cheeks. Pastor Thomas, no, the devil is at work here. This girl is possessed by a spirit of vengeance. I am a woman of faith. I tithe every week. You know my heart. I know your sins, the pastor interrupted harshly. You brought a pregnant mistress to this house while taking stolen money. You allowed this absolute degradation to take place under the guise of a celebration. Do not return to my church, Loretta. You are no longer welcome in our sanctuary. Your presence is a stain on our congregation. Loretta let out a loud, dramatic wail, burying her face in her hands. The public shaming was the ultimate destruction for a woman whose entire existence revolved around her perceived social standing. She had lost her church, her friends, and her meticulously crafted reputation in a matter of seconds. She was completely exposed, a toxic fraud laid bare in the afternoon sun. Maya, still standing frozen on the stage just a few feet away from me, suddenly realized the full gravity of the situation. Her hands dropped from her pregnant belly as the color drained from her face. The wealthy, successful man she thought she had stolen was penniless and unemployable. The luxurious lifestyle she had eagerly signed up for was a complete mirage. She looked at Jamal with an expression of pure, terrified disgust, backing away from him as if he were actively on fire. Near the back of the patio by the wrought iron security gates, two figures were desperately trying to slip away unnoticed. Andre and Tara, Jamal's trusted accomplices, were currently employing a pathetic, panicked retreat. Tara had kicked off her expensive high heels and was practically sprinting barefoot across the wet travertine tiles, pulling Andre by the sleeve of his suit jacket. They had seen the bank traces on the massive screen. They knew the federal authorities had a crystal-clear map of the stolen money, which meant their involvement in the fraudulent trust documents was only a matter of time. They almost made it to the exit, but the crowd of guests, already thoroughly disgusted by the sheer depravity of the Washington family, formed an impenetrable physical barrier. The wealthy neighbors, the bank executives, and the catering staff all subconsciously stepped together, blocking the pathway to the gate. Andre tried to shove a caterer aside, but a burly neighbor firmly planted his hand on Andre's chest, shoving him backward. "There is nowhere to go," the neighbor stated coldly. "You people are repulsive. Stay exactly where you are." Tara burst into tears, sinking to the ground and hugging her knees while Andre frantically paced like a trapped rat trapped within the perimeter of my estate, waiting for the inevitable. The air shifted. The distant wailing sound of heavy sirens tore through the quiet suburban neighborhood. The noise grew rapidly louder, multiplying, echoing off the surrounding mansions. Red and blue lights began to flash violently against the tall oak trees bordering the property line. The strobe effect illuminated the patio, casting harsh, alternating shadows across the terrified faces of the Washington family. The heavy iron front gates of the estate groaned loudly as they were forcefully pushed open. A fleet of dark, unmarked SUVs and local police cruisers flooded the circular driveway, their tires screeching against the pavement. The doors flew open simultaneously. 6 federal agents wearing dark windbreakers with FBI printed in bold yellow letters across the back marched purposefully into the backyard. They were flanked by 4 heavily armed local police officers. The crowd immediately parted like the Red Sea, pressing themselves against the edges of the patio to give the authorities a wide, unobstructed path. Special Agent Reynolds took the lead. He was a tall, imposing man with a stern expression and a no-nonsense demeanor. He did not look at the crowd. He did not look at Loretta weeping by the bar or Kiara sobbing over her broken phone. His eyes were locked entirely on the stage. He marched straight up the wooden steps, followed closely by 2 other agents. My private security guards recognized the federal badges and smoothly stepped aside, allowing the agents to flank Jamal. Jamal backed away, his hands raised in surrender, trembling so violently, his expensive watch rattled against his wrist. "Officers, wait. Gentlemen, wait. I am a respected banker. I own this house. You have the wrong person. This is a domestic dispute. My wife is hysterical. I can call my attorney." Agent Reynolds did not break stride. He grabbed Jamal by the shoulder, spinning him around with professional force. He kicked Jamal's legs apart, slammed him against the massive projector screen, and forcefully wrenched his arms behind his back. The sharp metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs ratcheting tightly around Jamal's wrists echoed across the silent patio. "Jamal Davis, Agent Reynolds," announced his voice carrying the absolute uncompromising weight of federal authority. "You are under arrest for felony wire fraud and identity theft. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. I am innocent," Jamal screamed, his voice cracking, shedding all his polished arrogance to reveal the terrified, cowardly boy underneath. "Nia, tell them you authorized the transfers. Tell them it was a joint account. You are my wife. You have to save me." I stood perfectly still, watching the federal agents physically secure my husband. I did not blink. I did not flinch. I let him stare into my eyes and see the absolute freezing void where my love for him used to reside. The man who had plotted to steal my life, betray my trust, and leave me destitute, was now wearing federal steel, begging for my mercy. "Take him away," Agent Reynolds instructed, signaling the two assisting agents. They grabbed Jamal by the biceps, forcefully dragging him away from the projector screen and marching him toward the steps. As they dragged Jamal away, the reality of the situation finally snapped Loretta's fragile, delusional mind. She let out a piercing, guttural scream and lunged toward the stage. She scrambled up the wooden steps on her hands and knees, ignoring the dirt and spilled champagne, ruining her expensive sequined outfit. She crawled directly toward me, her face smeared with mascara and tears, a mask of absolute unhinged desperation. She lunged forward, falling to her knees right at my feet. She reached out with trembling manicured hands, grabbing handfuls of the heavy silk hem of my dress. She gripped the fabric so tightly her knuckles turned white, bearing her face into my skirt, weeping hysterically. "Nia, please." Loretta wailed, her voice a shredded, pathetic rasp. "He is your husband. We are your family. We love you. I love you like a daughter. Please tell them it is a misunderstanding. Tell them it was a mistake. Do not let them take my baby boy away. You have a good heart, Nia. Please show us mercy." I looked down at the pathetic weeping woman groveling in the dirt at my feet. The same woman who had spent years degrading me, plotting my ruin, and trying to replace me with a compliant incubator. I did not feel a single ounce of pity or obligation. The years of biting my tongue, of suppressing my brilliance to protect their fragile egos, were officially over. I took a slow, deliberate step backward. Loretta's hands, suddenly grasping nothing but empty air, fell heavily onto the wet, muddy grass. "Family?" I asked, my voice ringing out with crystal clarity over the shocked, breathless whispers of the remaining guests. "Family protects you. Parasites drain you. And the black tax does not cover federal fraud." Loretta stared up at me, her mouth hanging open in a silent scream, the realization of her total defeat finally piercing her thick delusion. Her sequined top was smeared with dirt, her carefully styled hair plastered to her wet cheeks. I unclasped my designer evening clutch. I reached inside and slowly pulled out a crisp $20 bill. I let it flutter from my fingers, watching it drift down in the gentle breeze to land perfectly on the muddy turf right next to her trembling knees. "Here," I said, my tone as cold and unyielding as winter ice. "Catch an Uber back to your IRS-audited apartment." I turned my back on her and walked away, my posture perfectly straight, feeling an immense crushing weight permanently lift from my shoulders. Behind me, the federal agents forcefully guided Jamal into the back of a dark armored SUV. He was weeping openly now, a stream of incoherent apologies and desperate pleas that went completely ignored by the stoic officers. The heavy doors slammed shut, echoing like a final gunshot across the travertine patio. The crowd began to disperse rapidly, eager to flee the scene of the ultimate social and financial execution. High-end caterers hurriedly packed their equipment. Kiara was still sobbing uncontrollably over her shattered phone, entirely ignored by the fleeing guests. Maya stood completely frozen on the stage, her hands resting uselessly on her stomach, a monument to her own terrible life choices. The cleanup had officially begun, and the air already smelled cleaner. 6 months later, the dust had completely settled, leaving a radically different, brutally fair landscape in its wake. The justice system moved with surprising swiftness when dealing with airtight, highly documented federal wire fraud and identity theft. Jamal's highly publicized trial was a brief, humiliating affair. He was currently residing in a maximum security federal correctional facility in upstate New York, serving a mandatory 5-year sentence without the possibility of early parole. There were no tailored linen suits, no imported cigars, and no vintage champagnes in his new reality. His world was reduced to harsh fluorescent lights, a rigid daily schedule, and an assigned concrete cell. The arrogant king of finance was completely broken, his narcissistic ego shattered by the absolute reality of his actions. Loretta experienced the most spectacular, devastating fall from grace imaginable. The IRS swept through her life like a hurricane, seizing absolutely everything of value she possessed to cover her massive hidden tax debts. Her luxury vehicles were towed away in the dead of night. Her designer handbags, her carefully curated jewelry collection, and even her imported furniture were all liquidated at public auction. She was permanently excommunicated from her mega-church, entirely shunned by the women she used to desperately impress and manipulate. Today, Loretta works as a frontline cashier at a regional, highly greasy fast food chain. She wears a stiff, deeply unflattering polyester uniform and a mandatory paper hat. She spends her days standing on her feet for grueling 8-hour shifts, forced to smile and offer extra ketchup to rude customers, while the federal government actively garnishes 70% of her minimum wage paychecks. There are no more grand entrances, only the relentless, exhausting grind of survival. Kiara's fabricated digital empire collapsed overnight, transforming her into a digital pariah. The moment the viral clips of the backyard arrest hit the internet, her carefully curated influencer aesthetic was entirely destroyed. Her sponsors immediately severed all ties, issuing public statements condemning her actions. Several major cosmetic and lifestyle brands sued her aggressively for breach of contract and fraud, utilizing high-powered corporate attorneys to claw back every single dollar they had paid her. She was forced to permanently delete all her social media accounts after being buried under an avalanche of public mockery. She returned to utter obscurity. Working a menial retail job with a massive pile of legal debt, she had absolutely no hope